My name is Jim Stewart, and filling in for Rick Collins is Shireen Williams, and this is Off the Bench. Today we will be going over Week 2 preview of the Dallas Cowboys. They won their first game, but I can't really say that the Giants played as well as they were expected to play. You know, Odell Beckham Jr. was not on the field, and it was just a totally different offense without him on there.
Well, and it's hard to figure out how much of it was the Giants being just inept and how much of it was that Cowboys defense actually being pretty good, because they look good. And that, to me, was the biggest surprise of the entire game, was the way that Cowboys defense, particularly the defensive line, played. DeMarcus Lawrence looked like the real pass rusher. Maybe he's the war daddy that the Cowboys have wanted all along.
I do think the addition is not that he's a rookie, but the addition of Charles Tapper really helped. He was a very big player out of Oklahoma, and he's of course Oklahoma's great. But he came out of Oklahoma, he was a power rusher, and he did that. He had a huge third down play in the red zone against the Giants, and that sort of turned the tide a little bit on the momentum of which way, because it was sort of tied up for a while, and then the Cowboys really broke away after that third down stop by Charles Tapper.
Well, I think who we need to credit the most is Rod Marinelli. And
yeah.
Rod and I go back to the 1990s when he started his first NFL job, which was in Tampa, coaching that defensive line that, of course, had Warren Sapp on it, who eventually made the Hall of Fame. He turned him into a Hall of Famer. And, you know, I've said a lot of times that Rod's doing it with smoke and mirrors, and I think he's doing a little bit of this with smoke and mirrors now. He does have an all-pro player in Sean Lee. Jalen Smith looked better than expected. Some of those defensive linemen look better than expected. But let's be honest, this team has one Pro Bowler on this defense, and that is Sean Lee. And so he's getting it done right now. I know this was not a great offense. This was not a great offense last season. They failed to score over 20 points in several games. They had a hard time scoring over 20 points all season long. And, of course, the Cowboys held them to 3. But Rod Marinelli is the MVP so far of this season.
I agree. He turned that front seven into something that made the back the safeties and the corners, which was going to be a big question mark this year, wasn't even really an issue, because that front seven really put a lot of pressure on Manning and made him make a lot of mistakes up front. They had no running game, as we thought expected, as soon as they got rid of Rashad Jennings. And that wasn't even much of a running game. But as soon as they got rid of him, they really didn't have any really consistency in that running game. But I really am interested to see what they're going to be doing in Week 2. We now have this whole Zeke thing behind us a little bit, even though there are some lingering things going on the side. That whole circus, I think, is pretty much past until next season when it kicks up again. But
I don't know about that. I think it's coming.
You think it's coming?
Well, the fight's coming, and you know, the NFL has asked for him to be suspended as early as Week 3 or Week 4, depending on when the court. This is going to be something that's going to follow them all year, and the distraction part of it, they have handled very, very well so far. It was not a distraction in Week 1 like some thought it would be. Will it be a distraction going forward? They've been really, really conscientious about trying to make sure that it's not a distraction. Jason Witten said last week, you know, we are working on the game. We're not, Zeke's here right now, and that's all we can worry about is today. And this team has been very focused to avoid that being a distraction. But I do think it's going to be something that's going to be talked about all year long. And it's going to be a weekly thing. And they're going to have to do a good job of pushing it aside. And if Zeke's there, he's there. And if he's not there, he's not there. Now, I do think he plays all year, because I don't think the appeals court, I'm just guessing here, overturns this thing right now.
I think they're going to let it.
I think they're going to let it play out, but we don't know. We don't know what the court system's going to do. We don't know what the judges are going to do, and there's so many different court system and judges involved right now that we don't know how this thing's going to play out.
Of all the slights that the Cowboys have, being an emotional team is not one of them, which is perfect for what's going on right now.
No question.
You know, all their leaders and their head coach are people who don't let emotions get the best of them.
It's a process.
It's a process. Yeah. You know, you've got the Steelers and you've got a lot of these other teams in the league that are emotionally driven. That's why they're better at home than they are away. You know, the Cowboys are a very even team. They're a very even keel team. They really follow the leadership of their coach. And there are some people that say this and that about Garrett as a head coach, but the one thing he does bring is consistency. He never overhypes or underhypes anything. So this team is very emotionally stable to be able to handle drama like this. Now, it doesn't come from the top because Jerry is a very emotional person, but he brought in the right person to really stabilize the locker room, and I think they've done that. And some of your favorite players, Jason Witten, great leader. He's not an emotional guy either. He's not a rah-rah. He leads by example. Same with Sean Lee. He does get a little bit vocal at practices, but he's a very stable person, as well as Dak Prescott and Cole Beasley. They are all very even-keeled people. That's what makes Dak such a great rookie and second-year player. He does not let emotions affect his play and affect his locker room presence. And I think if any team's going to be able to get through this, it will be the Dallas Cowboys. And until that appeals court goes through, I think it's going to be a little bit of a headache. But when that's over, I think they're going to be able to level out because they know this isn't going to happen until next year. There's a lot of people that say they're just going to run Dak to death because they know he's going to have 6 games of break. Zeke to death because he's going to have a long break next year. He'll be able to rest those legs. And I really don't think that's a problem, especially with, and you and I have different opinions of this. You believe that there's no reason why the Cowboys need to throw the ball deep because they're so effective.
Absolutely.
Well, that plays to running Zeke. You know, I do believe that after a while when they actually go up against a good defense.
After a while.
Yeah.
And we're going to see this week,
Yeah.
which leads us into the Denver defense because they're not going to play many defenses that are better than Denver
Nope.
this year.
And they did have one of their players go down, Jared Crick went down. He had to have back surgery. He's on IR. But outside of that, they have a very stable rotation. They have a very powerful edge rushers. But I think this is going to be the test for them because I believe they're going to crowd the box. They have a great up front D line and they've got good linebackers. And I believe that Dak is going to have to throw the ball down the field. I know he completed the second most last week.
Yeah, it was the fourth or fifth.
Was it fourth or fifth?
Yeah, fourth or fifth. He had 4 completions of passes that traveled 20-plus yards in the air. Sam Bradford led the league with 8. I thought he did a much better job in the preseason and in his first game throwing the ball down the field, way more accurate and giving his guys a chance to go get it while avoiding the interceptions. And that's the key thing for him. He's about to set an NFL record for fewest interceptions in 500 attempts. He's at 498 right now, and he has 4 interceptions, so 2 more passes, and he sets a record for fewest interceptions in the first 500 attempts of a career. And that, to me, is amazing. And so they won 13 games last season playing the way they played, which was running Zeke, throwing the underneath stuff. Cole Beasley was their leading receiver, caught everything around him, had 2 drops last season.
Which is unbelievable in itself.
Unbelievable. Second highest percentage of catches on target per targets in the league to Eddie Royal. I mean, yes, great hands. So they didn't have to use Dez or Terrence Williams going down the field last season. If you don't have to do it, you don't do it because those are more risky plays. So you judge plays based on risk and reward. He didn't have to do it last year. Is he gonna, to your point, is he gonna have to do it more this year? Probably. He hasn't had to yet, although they only scored 1 touchdown last week, so they got 19 points, but they probably will. This may be the week they have to do it. The Broncos may very well crowd that line, put everybody up in the box and make him throw long, and we are going to find out at some point this year, absolutely, if he can do it. But I think he can do it. You just have to know when to do it, and again, goes back to that risk versus reward, which is what Dak has said all along. You weigh that, and that's when you take your shots.
You know what? And I have been a negative Nancy towards Dak and his long throwing down the field. I think he's an amazing field general. But to his defense, he really doesn't have deep threats like a lot of these players do. Terrence Williams is very inconsistent. Some days he's awesome and some days he's not. So that's an inconsistent player to look at.
And he doesn't have the speed.
No.
Back to your point.
And Dez doesn't have speed either.
Neither
he is
one
not going to separate from anybody.
Dak doesn't have the speed at his receiver positions.
No.
I agree with that.
So, you know, when you see Andy Dalton and Kirk Cousins completing a lot of long balls down the field, it's because Kirk Cousins had Deshaun Jackson and a couple other speedy receivers, and they had Andy Dalton had A.J. Green, one of the best long field or down the field threats in the league. Now, the question is, I think you are right. I think he works with what he has, and so the more I believe Dez is maturing. He matured a lot this offseason. I think he needs to start becoming the bully he's always been. He didn't do it a lot against the Giants because that tight end or that cornerback is very good at reading him. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Thursday Night Football and what a horrible presentation that was for kick off the second week. Next. We started week 2 off with a horrible matchup between the Texans and the Bengals, two teams that really didn't do well or anything in the first week, and it really followed over into the second week. Deshaun Watson had his first start, and Andy Dalton continued what he did the week before. And I think you watched a little bit more of the game than I did. What did you think of that Thursday night shamble?
Well, I would take it even back to week 1. Did we have a good game in week 1? I would argue there were no good games in week 1. Give me a good game. We haven't seen it yet in the NFL. And this point of the season, defenses are always ahead of the offense. I preach this every single year. And, you know, fantasy football players come out and want these players to score week 1. It doesn't happen in the NFL. It just normally doesn't happen. I know the Chiefs were kind of an aberration there and a couple other teams, but for the most part, defenses are ahead of the offenses, and it takes the offenses time to get in sync. Let's be honest, preseason is not really preseason. They don't get enough time together in the preseason, in games, which is when you need to get that timing aspect of it down. But to your point, yes, this was an awful football game. It was probably one of the worst football games we will see all year long. There were 16 punts. There were 16 penalties. It was terrible. And yes, it came down to the end, but who cares? It was an awful game to watch. And
there was only one touchdown scored.
Yeah. And we still watched it. That's the dumb thing about it.
My issue is it seems like in recent memory, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, these players, September was the month that all the offenses scored tons of points.
No, never happened.
Never happened?
Defenses are always ahead of the offense.
You think so? I thought I always remembered the Packers, because I was a Packer fan. They used to score a lot of points.
There are teams that are aberrations, but the first couple weeks, the defenses are always ahead of the offenses.
Now, would you blame that on training camp and
Yes.
the new changes to the CBA and the fact that
Yes.
Or does it go further than that? Does it go into college?
Yeah, it might go into college too, but they don't play their players in the preseason anymore. I say you get rid of 2 of the preseason games, play 2 preseason games. It is what it is. Come out, let's start. Colleges don't play preseason games. Let's go. Let's start this thing off and let them play from the beginning.
And what a lot of people don't realize, unless you've played sports yourself, is if you're not playing and you're not getting those reps in live games, whether it's preseason or not.
You can't simulate that.
No, and then when you go into the actual, that's why September has been some of the most injury-riddled months, because you go in, you're not used to contact, you're not used to going full speed, and then all of a sudden you get hurt.
Or you need IVs. How many players do we, well, when we're going, oh, it's not that hot. They haven't run full speed like that for 60 plays since last year. So yes, they're tired, they're winded, they're
cramping.
They're cramping, they're getting IVs, they're getting hurt. And a lot of that goes back to, you know, just not being, and they prepare as best they can, but you just can't simulate real live game action. And then when they do, and you lose a guy in the preseason, like the Patriots did with Julian Edelman, you're like, why are they playing these guys in the preseason? So it's a no-win thing for these coaches and these teams to get the players ready to be ready for week 1.
And in my opinion, I think it comes down to these players getting paid too much money, which means that these players, that like you said, they're holding them out. They're holding them out of preseason because if one man goes down, they're paying them $20 million. That's most of their salary, you know, most of their salary cap or salaries for a wide receiver or a defensive line. But that's another conversation. I think looking into week 2, I'm not sure the games are going to get much better this week than they were last week. I think, like you said, it takes a couple weeks to get the offensive in the groove. And the problem is like it is in baseball, if the offenses aren't doing anything, it's pretty boring.
Yeah.
And even not all the rules in the world, they've changed every rule, it seems, in the last couple of years to favor the offense. All the rules in the world are not going to make up for being rusty.
Well, and look, I'm not opposed to seeing a great defensive game. I'm good with that. If we have two great defenses and the defense are making great plays, I like that. But that game last night was garbage. It wasn't like the defenses were making great plays. I know J.J. Watt has a finger, but when did you hear his name? On the last play when he took down the center. He didn't do anything all game long. So it's not like the defenses were playing great. They didn't play great. It was just inept offenses. I don't want to see inept offenses. I either want to see really, really good defensive play or a high-scoring game, one or the other. And we didn't see that at all last night. And in fact, we haven't really seen that yet in the NFL. And I would ask this question: does the NFL have a problem? Because some would argue that college football is now more exciting than the NFL is. So going forward, does the NFL have a problem now trying to create these exciting matchups that it suddenly doesn't have?
And to your point, I think it's not just the wide receivers and quarterback, it's the line play. And the line play really breaks down to these college kids are coming into the NFL underdeveloped. They're playing in wide open spread offenses where the ball is released very quickly, or they have a quarterback that can take off.
Certainly don't know how to run block.
No, they don't. And really, it's all about tempo in college. It's not about technique. If they can get 5 or 6 guys that are massive that can hold a guy basically in place, the ball's out before those linemen can get through the line. The D-line can get through to the quarterback. Or you've got guys like Lamar Jackson who can just take off and just beat everybody. You can't do that in the NFL.
Well, Deshaun Watson did it.
Yeah. Yeah, but they're not going to get 300 yards on the ground.
Yeah,
They're just not. They're these defensive lines and these defenses will tee up on them and kill them. Case in point, Cam Newton. First couple years, he won the MVP because he had an amazing ground game, and it was making up for the fact that he was not that great throwing the ball. But last year, he had almost 2 concussions because every time he would grab the ball and tuck it to run, he'd get annihilated. And that's where these and that's where these two leagues need to start communicating. College doesn't care about the NFL. They care about their product.
Yep.
And the NFL has to depend on college to get their players. So either the NFL has to adapt, or they need to give some sort of incentive for college to start changing their offense back to more pro style.
This was one of the worst draft classes we have seen of offensive linemen in history. Scouts I talked to coming into the draft said there were 2 offensive linemen that they saw that could eventually be starters into the NFL. And the fact is, more of those guys will start in the NFL just because there's a lack of linemen now in the NFL, but they're not good by any stretch of the imagination. So yes, they are not teaching them the proper techniques in college, and when they get to the NFL, they're ill-prepared for what faces them. And then they get benched because they're getting killed by these defensive linemen teeing off on them. So the offensive line play has to improve, and it's why we look to the teams with good offensive lines that we go, they have a chance. That's Dallas, that's Tennessee, that's Oakland, who has spent a lot of money and a lot of draft picks on their offensive lines and making good offensive lines, and it's paying off for those 3 teams, which is why I think those 3 teams have a chance to contend this year.
And there are teams like Packers and Patriots where their offenses are built that they don't have to have that line play to make them awesome. Like, the Patriots, they get the ball out so quick to their short yard receivers that it's basically a running game. And the Packers have Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers can make chicken salad out of anything. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to take a real shift in the thought process of college coaches and even high school coaches to really emphasis on the offensive defensive line, because what's eventually going to happen is these players, these offensive linemen are going to say, I don't want to go to the NFL anymore, because every time I see it, these guys are coming out, these first rounders, and they're getting benched or they're getting sat, and there really isn't any good line play anymore, so why do it? And you see this across the line in every sport. Baseball, same thing. They're getting to the point where, when was the last time you heard kids going, I want to be a baseball player when I grow up?
Yeah, no, you don't hear it.
You don't hear it. And so football's got to be careful, or they will end up going down the same line. Even though they've been more innovative and they're bringing in technology and they're changing the game, they're changing the game too quickly and not realizing the ramifications of the decisions they make. Yes, it's a short-term burst of interest, and the game maybe opens up and there's more scoring, but they don't look down the road of ramifications, and that's a bad thing. And I blame that on Goodell. Rose and those guys before them made decisions for long-term benefit of the league, not short-term. And he has been someone who has been more of a short-term looker, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, not 10, 15 down the line. And we're starting to see those ramifications now.
Yeah, and I hope it gets better. I hope we see good games this week, and I hope going forward that the game improves and coming up. But it is going to take a change of a mindset, I think, before we see some of the things that long-term that we're looking to see.
And I am excited. I mean, some of the big games now are going to be this weekend. Some of the matchups that you look at coming up where you're like, that should be a high-scoring game. Because these defenses are not the 0-1 Ravens and the Steelers of old. These defenses are not as good as they used to be. So outside of apparently Texans, the Seahawks, and a couple others, these games should not be as close as they've been, and hopefully that changes in week 2. But that'll be it for today. We will see you tomorrow or Monday. Actually, it's Friday, so
see you Monday.